Good evening, and welcome to this Lakeville Town Forum on combating heroin in our community. This is a town forum that's sponsored by City of Lakeville, the Lakeville Police Department, in partnership with our Lakeville Rotary Club. Tonight we've assembled a panel. We're going to have a panel discussion on what's happening locally with heroin addiction in our community and opioid addictions, as well as having a presentation by a national speaker on opiate addiction and abuse. Every day, 78 Americans die from opiate overdose. Every day, 78 Americans die from opiate overdose. My name is Tom Von Hoff. I'm the former chief of police here in Lakeville. I was a Lakeville police officer for 34 years. In that time, I worked as an undercover narcotics agent in the mid-1990s. When I worked on the drug task force team, out of all of our cases that we handled, maybe 10% were heroin cases. 10% of our cases were heroin cases. In 2005, the DEA confiscated 500 kilograms of, or between 2002 and 2008, the DEA confiscated about 500 kilograms of heroin coming across the southern border. In 2013, it was 2,400 kilograms coming across the border. We have an epidemic on our hands here. 78 Americans die every day. It's estimated that there's over 500,000 heroin addicts in the United States right now. Over 8,000 died of overdoses last year. That's a 1 in 50 chance of someone using heroin dying of an overdose. This is a drug that kills people. And the interesting thing that you will hear tonight is that what we traditionally have thought of as people becoming addicted to drugs does not fit this mold. So tonight, we're going to start out with our chief of police, Jeff Long, who comes to us from Edina. After serving over 20 years there and being the chief of police there, he became the chief in 2014 here, and he's passionate about this. I'm going to introduce Jeff and have him come up here and talk a little bit about what we have seen in our own community. Let's give a warm welcome to Jeff.
Good evening. I want to thank everybody for coming. As Chief Von Hoff said, this is a very passionate issue of mine, primarily because this is something early in my career that I never thought that I was going to see in Edina or in the city of Lakeville. So I just want to talk briefly before we get into the guest speaker, but first people are saying, why are we doing this in Lakeville? What is the purpose of having a forum on opioids and heroin in Lakeville? Well, as Chief Von Hoff was saying, first, it exists in our community, just like it does in every other community in America. It is the fastest growing new use drug in America. Heroin's not the inner city dark alley drug that it once was. When I was growing up, heroin wasn't used openly like it is now. As I said, it's the fastest growing drug in America. Like marijuana, it's become more potent than it was when I was young. It's being laced now with a drug called fentanyl. Many of you are familiar with that. Fentanyl is 50 times more powerful than heroin and 100 times more potent than morphine. Many of the deaths that we are seeing are not necessarily from the heroin itself, it's from the fentanyl. And the problem with heroin is it doesn't come with a label. People don't know what they're getting when they get their heroin. Opioids are often a gateway drug to heroin. They're derived from the same poppy plant. America represents 5% of the world's population, yet we consume 80% of the opioids produced. It's a staggering number. As the medications, when people go on these opioids after surgery or whatever, and they're put on a painkiller and it's cut off for whatever reason, insurance won't cover it, the doctor doesn't feel they need it, the easiest way to go is to opioids, or is to go to heroin. 45% of the people that use heroin were also addicted to prescription opioid painkillers. So essentially, half the people that have started using heroin somehow got hooked on opioids. The fastest growing new users are young, white, and middle class. That's what we are. Like many families, I've been touched by this firsthand. I've been devastated. I've seen the devastation. I've seen the repeated use. I've seen the repeated jail time. My passion of this became because I continued to see this friend of mine locked up over and over, and it became a vicious cycle. He would get out, he would steal, he would go back to jail, but he never got treatment, and he never got educated. So I've saved this piece for the end. Why are we doing this in Lakeville? Well, last year in Lakeville, we had 3 deaths, 3 overdose deaths. We had 5 reported additional overdoses. And these are just what we know about. We don't know how many people have overdosed because it's not reported to us. But when you start seeing in a community like Lakeville that we have had 3 deaths, and these were good people. These weren't what you would suspect as heroin users, good, loving families, caring friends. They just somehow got hooked. So I hope from tonight's forum, you'll walk away at the end of the night wondering what you can do, that you learn a lot about this, why we're doing this here. You'll share it with your friends. And again, we'll talk about that at the very end. But I hope these statistics and the things I've talked about do get your attention, because they've certainly caught mine. It was all 3 of those deaths came in the summer. And we do have dealers here in Lakeville, just like every other community. Lakeville's no different than any other place. But we have to admit that it's here before we can address it, and that's a little bit what the forum is about tonight. So I will turn it over back to Chief Von Hoff, and he'll introduce the speaker.
Thank you, Chief Long. We're very fortunate this evening to have as a guest speaker Carol Ackley. She's the former director and owner of the River Ridge Treatment Center. She speaks nationally on topics of addiction and substance abuse. And I know she's going to talk about heroin use and opiates this evening. So let's give her a round of applause and welcome her.
Thank you. They offered me a booster seat. But I'm not a talking head, but we'll see what we can do here. Thank you for having me. Thank you for doing this community forum. I want to tell you that one of the most powerful things communities can do is come together with a common cause. This is how the best parts of our democracies work. And so seeing everyone here learning about this issue and some things that they can do starting right now to make a difference will make a difference. I'm going to, in 30 minutes, try and explain to you one of the most misunderstood illnesses that there is. The American Medical Association declared alcoholism, addiction to alcohol, a disease, a brain disease versus a character defect in 1956. It's over a half a century ago. And to this day, there are people who don't believe it's a disease. There are certainly people who don't understand it as a disease. There are people in the medical field, nurses and doctors, who don't believe it and don't understand it. And ignorance of illness or disability can have severe consequences in people's lives, up to and including death. Not just the illness or the disability itself with those kind of consequences, but the ignorance of it can have those kind of consequences, and has over the course of history if we look back. That's what we're trying to change tonight. 45 years ago, in this country, United States of America, into the 1970s even, if you were deaf and mute, didn't speak, what did we do with people with that disability back then? Anybody know or remember? We institutionalized them. And what kind of institution was it usually? Mental. Called them insane asylums way back then. They were horrible places. We thought because they couldn't communicate like we do, that they were either crazy or mentally deficient in some way. And so we locked them up and we threw them away as people. Because we were ignorant of the fact that if you can't hear, if your ears don't work, it's very difficult to learn how to talk. It has absolutely nothing to do with IQ, nothing to do with mental health. It's completely unrelated. Now, the way we treated them probably affected their mental health, but their disability had nothing to do with it, completely unrelated. In fact, the opposite's probably true. Some of them were probably geniuses with a lot to offer society, but we're never going to know because of ignorance. 400 years ago in this country, if you were epileptic, if you had brain seizures, and you happened to live in Salem, Massachusetts, what did we do with them? Tried to burn them, tried to drown them, all sorts of horrible things, because we were ignorant to the fact back then that they were having electrical storms, so to speak, in their brains that caused them to have convulsions. And not only were we ignorant, we were highly judgmental in our ignorance as well, because we decided they were bad, evil people, right? Witches possessed by the devil that needed to die. Ignorance and judgment, and they often go together. When we don't understand things, we tend to get judgmental. Ignorance and judgment is called stigma, and stigma can kill. And there remains a lot of stigma even today in 2017 about addictive disease and other brain disorders. And getting educated on addiction as a disease will help people get well. And that's what we want for everybody. Addiction is a disease that impacts the part of the brain that's responsible for your instinctual survival drive mechanism. It impacts the part of the brain that's responsible for your survival mechanism. That's why it's such a powerful disease. It's why it's ultimately a fatal disease, and why the experience of using mood-altering chemicals can be so powerful. If it impacted a different part of your brain, it might affect one area of your life, but not another. But because it impacts this core primal survival pathway, it usually impacts just about every area of a person's life as the disease progresses. So what is this part of our brains? Your brain's job, to keep this simple so we can understand it, because this is the most complex thing in the known universe. Not mine in particular, but the human brain. So to keep this simple so we can understand it, what is your brain's main job? What's its number one priority? To keep you alive, right? It's the master computer. Everything else that your brain does, which is a lot, that's not related to survival, is arguably just a perk. Its job is to keep you alive. That's its number one priority. That's what it will always default to when making decisions. What needs to happen to keep this organism alive? So because it's so critical, part of that process is automatic. You don't have any conscious control over what needs to happen to stay alive. Your brain takes complete care of it for you. An example is your heart beating. Your heart has to pump blood 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, no vacations, no holidays. But what would happen if the message from your brain to pump got interrupted for some reason? It's over, isn't it? It's pretty clear cut. Your brain takes complete care of that for you. It's a pretty amazing machine. Another part of the survival messaging system is semi-automatic. Either you have some control consciously over the behavior that needs to happen to stay alive, or your brain takes over for you, so there's a fail-safe built in. It can work both ways. An example is breathing. You have to continuously oxygenate your blood. Now, you can control your breathing rate consciously to a certain extent if you're focused on it and paying attention to it. But what happens when you're sleeping or when you're thinking about something other than breathing most of the time? Then your brain seamlessly moves in to keep this life-saving rhythm going, so it's a semi-automatic process that can work both ways. Now, if you want to get a sense of how powerful this survival pathway is in our brains, think about this imaginary scenario for a minute. Pretend that you're underwater swimming. Everybody done that? You're swimming underwater, so you're holding your breath, right? Because we're not fish. and you realize it's time to go to the surface and get some more air. You're running out of oxygen. You can feel that consciously. And as you swim to the surface to get some more air, you get stuck underwater. What starts to happen? You panic. And why do you panic? What's the message your brain gets in a panic situation, a panic moment? Emergency alert, emergency alert. We've got a life and death situation going on here now. You're running out of oxygen. Your brain immediately and automatically, and that's the key word here now, this now becomes an automatic life-saving process, no longer under conscious control. Your brain immediately and automatically goes into emergency alert mode, fight, flight, or freeze response, the oldest, most primal pathway in our brains. Parts of it are hardwired in at birth. And you get adrenaline now, pumping through your system. This is where you see a 98-pound woman who can lift up a car because her baby's under it. She would not be able to do that if this system weren't activated in her brain, giving her that kind of power and focus. You get intensely focused, tunnel vision, in an emergency alert life and death situation. You forget about everything else that's going on in the world. Doesn't even matter. You forget about everything else that's going on in your life, and you get totally focused on this current life and death situation that you're in. That's what our brains do automatically to keep us alive. All of our brains. So would you agree that at this point in time, the most important thing in the world is to hold your breath for a few more seconds till you get unstuck? Would you agree with that? Now, there are other things that are important in your life, very important. Your family, your friends, your job. But in this moment, in this situation, this goes to number one on the list, automatically. Would you agree that at this point in time, you're trying to hold your breath for a few more seconds till you get unstuck as hard as you've ever tried anything? You are totally focused, giving it everything you got. And would you agree that at this point in time, you want to hold your breath for a few more seconds till you get unstuck, more than you want anything? In this moment, you would consider trading anything you owned, your most precious possession, for an oxygen tank, and it would make sense. Be a good trade. Now, you wouldn't have been willing to do that yesterday, and you won't be willing to do it tomorrow if you live, because outside of this moment, it's not a good trade. It doesn't even make sense. But in this situation, somebody showing up with an oxygen tank is probably the best thing that could have happened to you. Agreed? And yet, no matter how hard you're trying, no matter how focused you are, no matter how important this is, your life depends upon it in this case. If you don't get unstuck, what's going to happen anyway? No matter how much you don't want it to, and no matter how hard you're trying. You're going to die, but how are you going to die? You're going to breathe automatically. And in this exceptional situation, your lungs are going to fill with water instead of air, and you're going to drown. So this very survival message, keep breathing no matter what, that's automatic, supposed to keep us alive, in this exceptional situation is going to have the opposite effect. It's going to kill you instead of save you, same message, automatic. Now here's the piece I want you to remember about this. The survival messages in our brain, when this pathway gets accessed, override all the other messaging systems in the brain in that moment. That's how we're wired for survival. The rational brain shuts down, and this primal survival brain takes over. The messages supersede intellect. You know you can't breathe underwater. It's not like you don't have that information. You know it for a fact, and you do it anyway. They supersede effort. You're trying, you know what the consequences are going to be in this case. It happens anyway. They supersede desire. You don't want to do this. You don't even have any ambivalence in this case. You don't want to breathe underwater. And it happens anyway. The survival messages in our brains when this pathway is running the brain override all the other messaging systems. That's how we're all wired for survival. Okay, tuck that aside for a second. The other parts of the survival pathway are voluntary. We have to actually do the work to stay alive. It's not automatic. There's 4 main things human beings have to do to stay alive that aren't automatic. What are they? Eat, drink fluids, sleep, not right now, but soon. Eat, drink fluids, sleep. No, thank God it's not exercise. Well, maybe you never heard of this one. Sex. Now, contrary to popular belief, you're not going to die if you don't have sex. It's never happened. But what would happen to our species if nobody procreated? So in fact, this is one of the most powerful of the survival pathways in the human brain, because this one keeps our whole species alive. So individually, we have to eat, drink fluids, and sleep, and as a species, we have to procreate. So how does this work? How does your brain make sure these things happen, because that's its main job? What's the hardwiring of this system we're born with? We're born with about 17% of our brains set up, wired. The rest happens as a result of genetics and life experiences. We build our own brains. But how does a brand new baby, 1 day old, how does it know it needs to eat, and how does it manage to get food? A 1-day-old baby cries. And why does it cry? Doesn't know what hunger is, doesn't know what food is, doesn't know what its stomach is. What's it responding to instinctively? Pain. Pain and discomfort is the message your brain uses from the very beginning to get your attention, or somebody's attention, that something needs to be done here to keep the organism alive. The baby cries, the mother hears the cries, hopefully she feeds the baby, and then what happens? After it poops and burps and all that stuff. Goes to sleep. Why? Life is that tough on day 1. You eat, you poop, you sleep. But why does the baby stop crying? The pain's gone away, it's content. The need's been met. And this is your survival pathway in its simplest form on day 1, and then we build and complicate on this. Pain or discomfort is the message you get that something needs to be done to stay alive. There's a powerful drive to resolve it, make the pain go away, that you learn through the experience of your life what to do. And then there's a pleasurable contentment reward sensation. And this baby is going to start to fine-tune these connections now, build its own brain, according to the experience of its life, so that within 48 hours of birth, the baby can start to differentiate between its caregiver's touch, smell, sound of her voice, look of her face over everybody else's. It's called bonding for survival. It's a pretty amazing process. Now, it's not a whole lot different for us than it is for the baby, except we've learned what to do. We know how to interpret the signals. We know what they mean now. And we've been practicing these survival behaviors every day, multiple times a day, for however long we've been here, however many years we've been here, until now the responses are automatic. They're habit, they're hardwired in. What does it feel like for you when you're really hungry, starving? You ever been in the grocery store when you're really hungry? Are your decisions based on your carefully prearranged grocery list? No. Are they based on your checkbook balance? No. Are they based on the FDA requirements for the human race? No. Need and timeliness, right? What looks good, it needs to be appealing, but the number one criteria when you're really hungry, I gotta have it right now, right? You might even hand the cashier the wrapper, say, here, I couldn't even make it to the counter. So even though you're capable of good decisions around food, there are times when that's not the part of your brain that's steering the decision. It's coming from the place of need and discomfort and survival. And you have to actually stop what you're doing and attend to this primal need. It temporarily reprioritizes your brain. And then what does it feel like after a satisfying meal? Some people are like the baby, they want to have a little snooze. Some people get energized, but the pain goes away, your mood improves, You can think and focus again, you can make good decisions again, and life moves forward. And we go through this process day in and day out until the pathways get set, get honed into the wiring of our brains. Brain cells that fire together, communicate with each other, wire together. The more you do something, the more you think something, the more you feel something, anything, positive or negative. The more it happens, the more automatic, the stronger the connections are. Repetition is what wires the human brain. Same process of need and pain and pleasure is true with sleep, it's true with thirst, it's true with sex. Pain if you don't do it, a powerful drive to resolve it that temporarily focuses your brain and reprioritizes it, pleasurable reward. This is how we're all wired for survival. These are the same pathways now in this brain that we've built that mood-altering addictive chemicals use. And in addictive disease, the chemicals ultimately hijack those pathways. They take them over, they change the priorities of the brain for survival. What do you think it feels like for an addict or an alcoholic if you really want to get high and you can't? This is going to sound familiar. Irritability, difficulty making good decisions, singular focus on one thing, and ultimately the need reprioritizes the brain. And then what does it feel like when you finally get the substance in your system? Relief, satisfaction, pleasure, sometimes just absence of pain. You don't really get pleasure anymore, and this is particularly true of opiate addiction, but at least the pain goes away, which is actually good enough for survival. It's not a great way to live, but it's good enough for survival. The brain of an addict or an alcoholic gets cross-wired molecularly, chemically, into believing that it needs that chemical to live, that it's a survival need because that's the pathway it's using. And if your brain believes that you need alcohol to live, pot to live, cocaine, speed, Vicodin, pills, heroin to live, if your brain believes that, it's going to make sure that you get it because that's your brain's job. But in the case of addiction, it's just like air underwater. Even if it's going to kill you, even if you know it's killing you. That's the power of this disease. The way this works very quickly is that information in your brain is molecular. Just like we use letters of the alphabet to create words and sentences, your brain connects molecules to make molecular messages. And the messages pass from one brain cell to the next till they get where they need to go. And what happens in addiction is the mood-altering chemicals are so similar to your brain's natural reward chemicals for survival behaviors that it can fake out the brain chemistry into thinking that the mood-altering chemical, the addictive chemical, is actually a survival need. And this is just an example here of how close cocaine is to dopamine. And dopamine is the natural messenger in your brain that encourages you to do survival behaviors, that rewards you with good feelings. And so all mood-altering chemicals have a molecular structure that looks like the natural chemicals in your brain, including opiates and heroin, which naturally mimic endorphins, which are our own powerful natural pain relievers. And as the person starts to use the chemicals, your brain starts to make less of its own because it perceives there's too much. And as your brain makes less of its own, it's now going to require you to put more in. And this process starts to happen until the brain is not making any of its own natural reward chemicals, and the person only feels like living when they have the synthetic in there, or the opiate, or the heroin, or whatever they're addicted to. And so the chemical takes over their lives because they need it to live. And this is not about rational sense. This is not your rational brain. This is your primal brain. And so somebody says you have a problem, right? I hope somebody says that. You have a problem you need to quit using, right? If you quit using, everything will be fine. That is the problem. So they quit. Now they have nothing. None of their own natural reward chemicals and not the chemicals. So what do you think that feels like? Pain, fear, overwhelmed, terrified, desperate, anxious, depressed, suicidal? Because what does this brain think is happening right now? How does this brain interpret this situation? It thinks you're dying. And if your brain believes you're dying, right or wrong, if your brain believes you're dying, it says what? Emergency alert, we got a life and death situation going on here, right? Tunnel vision. Do whatever you have to do to stay alive right now. We'll worry about the consequences later. And what did this brain learn how to do through repetition to get all those receptors filled to feel like it's alive, fast? Put the chemical in there. And when the craving to use gets intense enough, it wins. It doesn't respond to reason. It doesn't respond to intellect. It doesn't respond to the law. It doesn't respond to the people that love you. Because the brain is saying, do what you have to do to stay alive, and we'll worry about the consequences later. And this is what happens to an addicted brain. This is withdrawal. And so people need to be in a safe, supportive environment to start to accomplish the restructure of this brain chemistry, to get your brain to start making its own natural pleasure reward chemicals again so that you feel like living. And we have lots of different treatment methods. We have medications, lots of things to help do that in a supportive environment. Addiction is progressive. It's a progressive brain disease. It gets worse over time if left untreated. It's chronic, and this is really important to understand because for many, many years we treated it as an acute condition. You go to treatment, you're cured, you're fine. That's not how addiction works. The brain does not forget when it's about survival. This is also true for trauma survivors. When the brain has been in a traumatic situation, it doesn't forget those things either. It's not supposed to. Your brain's job is to remember important things about staying alive, including dangerous situations. And so when a brain has learned to use a chemical to feel like living, it doesn't forget that. So it's now vulnerable in ways that it wasn't before the addiction. And so we need to treat this as a chronic condition that needs daily effort to keep the brain chemistry in balance. And addiction remains a fatal disease. We don't have a cure for it yet. Kills some people slowly and painfully over a long period of time. Cirrhosis of the liver, emphysema, malnutrition and starvation, dementia, organic brain disease, long, painful wasting deaths. And it kills a lot of people, especially young people, just like that. Gone. Here 1 second, gone the next. And this is true of opiates and overdoses. You read about it in the paper every day. The headline won't say this person died from substance abuse for addiction necessarily, But if you read through the story, you'll hear it in the details. Died in a fire with a lit cigarette, choking on your own vomit, falling out of a top bunk bed and cracking your head open, drunk and disoriented into a river and drowning, drunk and disoriented into a snowbank and freezing, car accidents, drug interactions, overdoses, accidental overdoses, domestic violence, child abuse, suicide, accidental suicide, kills people every day. That's why we're here. The good news is we know how to put this disease in full remission for most people. Not everyone. Some people have done so much damage to their brain, either due to the quantity of use, the unique toxicity of some chemicals and chemical combinations, and the unique vulnerabilities of some people's brains. Some people's brains are exquisitely sensitive, and any kind of alteration in brain chemistry can have severe consequences. But for most people, we can put this into full remission. We can't cure it, but full remission, which for a chronic fatal disease is remarkable. We can also do harm reduction for the small percentage of people that we can't put into full remission. We have medications and treatment techniques that will at least slow the progression of the disease and keep that person and other people safer. And most importantly, and most often forgotten, this fatal brain disease is 100%, not 99%, 100% preventable. Because if you don't put the chemical in there, you can't get this disease. This is why working with young people, particularly at-risk young people, is worth every minute, every penny, every hug we spend on it, because this is preventable. It takes about 6 months to restore brain chemistry. That's a ballpark figure. Depends on your age, your metabolism, your overall state of health, other complications, how much damage has been done, but generally about 6 months. So what would be the first thing somebody would have to do to stop this addictive cycle in that brain? You got to stop putting it in there. This isn't about moderation anymore. This is about abstinence, rigorous abstinence. Once we get that, the next thing we have to do is get the brain to start making those own pleasure chemicals again, naturally, so that you feel like living. Because being sober and miserable, that's not recovery. In fact, nobody's going to stay miserable for very long. That's a danger signal to the survival brain. We're wired as human beings to seek pleasure and avoid pain. So where do you get the raw materials to make your own really powerful good stuff? Where does it come from? You are what you eat. Pretty scary, huh? And your brain can't make any endorphins or dopamine or serotonin or any of that own natural good stuff out of Cheetos. Can't be done, not even a whole bag. Make a few out of Oreos, thank God, but not out of Cheetos. This is about good, solid nutrition, a growing body of research and evidence that we are what we eat. And if we're not giving our brain what it needs to function, it affects our physical health and our mental health. And stress prevention. The main cause of relapse is stress overload. Stress causes cravings, and cravings cause relapse. And frankly, we live in a very stressful world. And it gets more stressful every day. And kids feel stress as intensely as adults do, with often fewer resources. We need to build stress management into our everyday lives. Just like we do preventative tooth care, just like we take a bath every day, we need to build stress prevention into our family lives to help our kids. Who's vulnerable to this disease? No one is immune. No one is immune from this disease, but some people are more vulnerable. 50 to 60% of the vulnerability is genetic. If you have substance abuse in your blood family history, you run a greater risk. The other 40 to 50%, which is the part we can influence, is environmental. Early onset of use is the most significant factor. The younger somebody starts using, the more likely they are to get this disease, because the adolescent brain is uniquely vulnerable to the effects of mood-altering chemicals, because the adolescent brain is not done yet. It's a work in progress. Dr. David Walsh, who's an expert on the adolescent brain, says to parents of adolescents, it's like getting a brand new shiny red race car straight out of the factory. 400 horsepower engine, and the brakes are back ordered. That's an adolescent brain. And so, as caring adults in these kids' lives, we supply the brakes till they start to come into the factory, but that's what makes adolescent brains uniquely vulnerable to mood-altering chemicals and this disease. Spending time around mood-altering chemicals puts people at risk. Poor nutrition, we talked about that. If you don't have what it takes to feel good enough naturally, and the first time you do a drunk or have a drink, you feel better than you've ever felt in your whole life? How does your survival brain register that experience? Good or bad? Good. It remembers it. High stress levels combined with low coping mechanisms. We teach our kids algebra, we teach our kids geometry, we teach our kids foreign languages. Do we teach our kids how to cope with stress? Do we have a class in that? Do we have a master's degree in that? They need to know from a very young age. Other chronic illness, including mental illness, your brain is an organ. It gets ill like the other organs in your body. Other chronic illness puts people at risk for using chemicals to treat the chronic illness, and therefore this disease, which is how opiate addiction often starts, with chronic pain. And unresolved grief and loss. When we carry a lot of pain in our hearts and our souls that we have no place to share it with, that ends up needing medicating. And people use chemicals to medicate the pain in their soul. And when those medications are opiates, very easy to turn into addiction. So we have these 4 issues that need to be addressed together. Otherwise, it's like this. We need to look at substance abuse along with high-functioning mental health. People need to be able to feel good. I'm not saying you have to be happy 100% of the time, but you need to experience pleasure and reward to want to keep living. People with traumatic life experiences are more vulnerable to substance abuse because it helps them get through it, and that makes them more vulnerable to addiction. We can treat the addiction. If we don't help them cope with the pain that they carry, it's very hard to stay sober. They can get sober, but it's very hard to stay sober. And other chronic illnesses, particularly chronic pain, which is often treated with painkillers, and chronic pain is really about inflammation. And painkillers do nothing for inflammation, so we have the whole concept backwards. I want to talk a little, just for a few minutes as we finish here, about some things you can do right now, because this can feel really hopeless, and it's not. We have good treatment. We know treatment works if we can get people to treatment, which means we need to understand the disease and who's in trouble. With opiate addiction, which is one of the most powerful addictions because it hits both the pleasure pathway and the pain pathway. It's like the best thing your brain ever thought of. It's like, why didn't you think of this sooner? This is a miracle. That's how your brain sees it. And your brain can't tell the difference between what your doctor gives you and what you get on the street. Once it hits your brain, it's all the same thing. It all does the same thing. It replaces your own natural endorphins. So one of the first things that you can do is lock up your narcotics. Do you keep guns unlocked in your house? Do you keep loaded guns unlocked in your house? That's what having a narcotic prescription is like in your medicine cabinet. And most teenagers will tell you that the first time they use it, they went into their own medicine cabinet at home, their parents' medicine cabinet, and got the pill. There are people who maintain their opiate addictions by going to garage sales and ask to use the bathroom and go in and get what they need. They need to be locked up, and you need to tell your friends and your neighbors and your families, because these are lethal medications in the wrong hands for the wrong reason. So this is Vicodin, oxycodone, OxyContin, Tylenol with codeine, codeine cough syrup, Percocet, as well as anti-anxiety medications, Xanax, Valium, Librium, all of those. They're powerful medications that need to be locked up. Do not let people have access to those medications. We need to support whatever it takes to come up with the money to get Narcan for our police officers, for our emergency medical services, for our hospitals. If you have a family member who's addicted to opiates, Narcan can bring them back from an overdose. Now, that's not to say they're cured, but you can't cure anybody if they're overdosed, if they're dead. Narcan can bring somebody back. We have that now. We didn't have that 5 years ago, 10 years ago. You need to make sure you have access to it. The Steve Rummler Foundation, R-U-E-M-M-L-E-R, I believe is how it's spelled, can help you get it. You need to do whatever work we need to do to come up with the money so that police officers have it, so that emergency medical EMTs have it, so the hospital has it, so the clinics have it, so that we can save people's lives and then get them to treatment. Treatment works. Treatment helps. We need to have open, honest conversations in our homes about the dangers of the world, which include mood-altering chemicals. And we need to have facts, not alternative facts, real facts about these chemicals. I'm not talking about scaring people half to death. The truth alone with a lot of these chemicals will do that. But actual facts, we need to be talking about it. We need to support each other in managing stress, particularly kids. We need to talk about it. We need to try different things. Having kids that are accountable to someone, to their parents, to their family, to their team, to their school, being part of a bigger world than themselves, when they get all wrapped up in themselves, which is natural, helps them develop the rest of their brain. And so keeping our kids involved in our family lives and in our communities can make a difference. And just by being here tonight and caring and educating yourself, you're making a difference right now. So thank you.
Thank you, Carol. And I mean, just what we were ending on there and talking about the support and what you can do. We're going to talk more about that, and that's so timely about what actually can be done. You know, as I was thinking about this, opiate deaths have quadrupled since 2000. Between 2013 and 2014, heroin overdose deaths have gone up 26%. This is accelerating. This is not something that's just going incrementally. This is accelerating. And we're going to talk a little bit about this tonight and get a little bit of a perspective locally about that. The other thing I will say is that as a narcotics officer, when we would see people on the streets who were addicted, we would say that the drug dealers stole their lives. They steal the lives of those people who use. And that's the way that we felt about it, that they steal their lives. And not only if they die, but they can't live. There's no living that goes on when someone's suffering from addiction. And you'll hear about that tonight. In addition to that, all the family members that are impacted. It's not one person. It's not just that person who's using. It's all the family members. It's the friends. It's everyone else that's impacted in those relationships. And that's why we have to come together. And we're very blessed and fortunate tonight to have a great panel that's going to talk about things locally. And over here on the right here is Officer Jeff Hansen. He's a 12-year officer of the Lakeville Police Department. He spent 5 years as an undercover narcotics detective. And I'll give Jeff just a couple minutes to talk about why he's here tonight.
Hoping to add in law enforcement perspective to this conversation, as well as having the unique opportunity to work narcotics investigations for 5 years, from the $20 street dealer all the way up to international drug crimes that reach from Mexico to Minnesota. So hopefully I'm able to offer some insight from that perspective.
Okay, thank you very much. And next to him is our County Attorney, Jim Backstrom. He is the 23rd County Attorney of Dakota County. He was elected first in 1987. He's been our County Attorney since then. He's an avid advocate of victims of crime. I can say this from my experience of working with Jim for many years. And I know that this is an issue of great concern to him.
Well, absolutely, Chief, and thank you all for coming as well. This is a life or death situation in many cases that we're talking about. And when you think about Dakota County and the impact that illegal drugs have in our community, it's enormous. And I'll just share this with you as we get started, just so you can keep this in perspective. I, as the county attorney, prosecute all the felony crimes in Dakota County. 35% of those crimes last year were illegal drug cases. That's one out of every 3 cases that crosses our desk. And that's just sale, possession, or manufacture of the illegal drugs. That doesn't count all the other crimes associated with drug use and abuse, the domestic violence, the thefts, the robberies, the some cases homicides associated with it. If you add it all together, it's 45 to 50% of all the crime in our county, which is a relatively safe suburban community. But illegal drugs drive the crime rate, not only here in this community, but across our nation. And as you've heard already, and as we'll talk about in a little more detail, heroin is one of the fastest growing and the most deadly, clearly the most deadly of any of the illegal substances that we deal with in the cases that cross my desk each and every day. We had 22 heroin and opioid related deaths in Dakota County last year. You heard about 3 in Lakeville. There were 22 in the entire county. 9 of those were directly from heroin overdoses, and 13 were from prescription pain medications and the other opioid pain medications that you've heard about that can easily cause death as well. So it's a huge problem. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you, Jim. And on the end here, we have Rick Hillier. Rick grew up in an upper middle class family in Eden Prairie. In the 4th grade, his family moved to Orange County, California. He came back as a sophomore in high school to Bloomington, Minnesota with his dad, and was introduced to opiates by a friend, a coworker, when he was at a sales job for a corporate sales job. That led to a 10-year dependence on opiates. We're very fortunate to have Rick here tonight to talk about his recovery and talk a little bit about that. Welcome, Rick.
Thank you. I understand there's a free PlayStation somewhere in here. No, I'm just kidding. No, it is an honor to be here and speak with you. I think the time has come for stigma to be erased in this situation, because this is a problem that's coming. It's not an inner city problem. It's coming to your door. It's coming to your kids. And we need to start talking about it, and we need to be solution-oriented. I survived for 10 years. Most of the people I know are not alive today. I lost everything, and I am blessed to be here to speak with you today, and I hope that we can answer some questions for you. Thanks.
Okay. Rick, why don't we start out with you, Rick, and talk a little bit about your beginning and how that started with you in your dependence to opiates.
Like the speaker said very eloquently, youth, and parents are kind of the brakes on youth. In was a lot like a lot of other teenagers. I liked to party. I didn't have many breaks. So, what happened is eventually, as I got into college and into my second year, I started working in a corporate sales job. I was introduced to my first real addictive substance, which was a low-grade painkiller called Ultram. That led to Vicodin, then to Percocet, then to Oxy, then and my career was still going at the time, and then I was able to afford these drugs. Then to shooting OxyContin, then eventually to heroin, that's where a lot of opiate dependence leads to, is heroin. It destroyed my life. I ended up in Minneapolis with one bag of things on the streets with no car. It'd been the second time I was homeless, surviving on the streets in winter or summer, it was awful, and I didn't want to be alive anymore. But thankfully, we live in a state that is the best in the nation for treatment resources. You can be someone who, with no resources, not a dime, and go to treatment and have a 4-star treatment experience in this state. We have one of the most powerful young recovery communities in the nation here, amongst Narcotics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous and the various other groups. We have an entire community of young kids that have been through this and have all come together, hang out together, do fun things together, fun, sober things together. So we have so many resources here in the state of Minnesota, and I aim to shed light on that.
What, in your assessment, where would you be right now if you had not found treatment when you did?
Well, most likely dead, because it was just a sort of luck or God or whatever you'd like to believe, that I was still alive at the time. So, I'd been mugged and assaulted a couple of times. Just that's part of being homeless. And I had overdosed once and narrowly escaped with my life. Probably dead.
Was there a moment when you decided to go to treatment? Was there a seminal moment that you came to it and you decided that I need to go in and change my life? And what was that?
It was, really, I'd like to say there was an aha moment, but it was a 10-year battle. So about 4 years in, I started to battle it. And I had 2 years of sobriety at one point, complete abstinence, but refused to go in and get my, I also suffer from a little depression and anxiety. Well, that's very simple to solve, but I refused to go get it looked at. Refused to take any meds for it, was very black and white about it. That cost me the 2 years of sobriety and plunged me into a further, like they said, a chronic disease. And even if you stopped using, it's interesting, if you start using again, it's like you were using that whole time. You're instantly plunged back into a world of addiction, more severe than when you started. It's a strange phenomena. So, my real aha moment, I guess, where I wanted help the most was I had been kicked out of, 2 or 3 different halfway houses. I was drunk on the streets of Minneapolis when one day I decided to go to a bridge and take my life. I just had enough. No texts, no Facebook posts. I didn't want anyone to interfere. So I began that walk that hot summer day to the bridge to throw myself off it or hang myself with a cord that I had, whichever, it didn't matter. And the heat was very hot. I didn't think to bring any water because who needs water if you're gonna die momentarily? I collapsed on the street in heat exhaustion, and in the Franklin, East Lake area, in those neighborhoods. And I woke up to a man who was there, and he was feeding me canteens of water and had drugged me to a tree. And he went and somehow knew how to speak Arabic to some guy to get more water. And he was a tall, cleanly shaven white guy who had all the trappings of a homeless person, but he didn't smell like a homeless person. And he had, all these things. And he said, stay calm. You have heat stroke. I said, I feel sick. I feel like throwing up. He said, go to sleep. And when you wake up, I'll be here watching over you. And when I woke up, he offered me tons of advice on things I could eat out of the ground. He had all sorts of like survival knives, a tarp to sleep under, a hammock to sleep, all sorts of advice. And his kindness to me as I laid there, and I mean, it was just incredible. And somehow I just felt after meeting this guy, this random person, that I wanted to live again. And I said, keep all your things, thank you, but I have a feeling I'm going to be in a safe place tonight. And I went to bed under a tree, and it started raining. And I started to walk into the streets. It started to downpour, and 2 headlights appeared. It was a friend of mine who had been out looking for me that said, I just felt like something was wrong. And the whole city, he happened to go down that street and saw me. I went to first a psych ward, then to treatment, and then to a local place called Redemption Ministries, which I continue to volunteer for. It's a faith-based ministry, and we take people and we in turn help them heal, go through dialectical behavioral therapy twice a week, and we volunteer in our local community in food shelves. And that place gave me the opportunity to have a place to just finally just heal and be in a safe place with TV and cable. And they were very tolerant of me. And anybody could have that experience. There's so much help that people can get if they only ask. So.
Okay, and we will come back to that. Jeff, talk a little bit about the rise of heroin and what you saw in your experience in your 5 years on the task force.
Rick's story is, it seems to be pretty common, although it doesn't end as positive as his has. But it seems to be that prescription painkillers, opiate-based painkillers, are the gateway drug. Marijuana is so commonly talked about as the gateway drug. We've found, and there's been studies done, that the first drug that adolescents ever abuse, like what was said before, is right out of their grandparents, their parents, the prescription medications that are found at home. And from my experience, anybody that I've seen addicted to painkillers to the point where they're shooting oxy pills, it's a matter of time before they start using heroin. And much of that is based off the economics behind it. Illicit pills on the street, our dependency in America on prescription drugs has created such a deep black market for prescription medications on the street that they're going for $1 a milligram. So if you took an 80 milligram oxycodone pill, you're paying $80 for it. As somebody progresses through their addiction, they're using 3, 4, 5 pills a day. They have a $400 a day habit. Well, along comes heroin at 500 to 1,000% cheaper than that. So what was once never even imaginable to a prescription pain abuser now becomes a necessity. And that's what I saw when we were investigating these drug dealers. You often end up talking to drug users, and it's fascinating hearing the stories and how similar they are and how they went down this road of addiction.
And in looking at this, did this surprise you when you would hear these stories? I mean, in terms of what you thought you would see for addicts and people addicted to this, or did you think it would surprise them?
It was surprising because I worked as a patrol officer for 7 years prior to being assigned to a narcotics investigator, and I knew as much as, I guess, what I would imagine anybody else knew, and that was very little. I knew that, Vicodin was prescribed when you get your wisdom teeth taken out, and oxycodone is even stronger. Morphine is really strong. That was to the extent of what I knew about opiate-based painkillers, and boy, did I get a crash course in it. And I feel like from 2007 on up, I kind of saw the rise of the prescription drug abuse in our area, and the rise in heroin, which on a different level, heroin it's a target market. It's if you look at it from a business aspect, these drug dealers, these drug cartels are injecting heroin into society and into specific markets where there's the demand for it. The upper middle class suburban areas are prime areas for injecting heroin into the community because there's a lot of people that are addicted to prescription medications, opiate-based prescription medications specifically.
And from your experience, and you have a large group of citizens here, people watching, how could that be shortcutted? And what would be some things that you would think that would possibly stop that progression? Because clearly we see this progression here, and you're right, that the heroin is coming into the market now, and they're filling that. And how do people have any ability to do that?
You know, it sounds really simple, but the locking up the prescription drugs, preventing a child or an adolescent or a teenager or even somebody who's 20 years old taking that first dose and just starting down that road is probably the single biggest thing that you can do, because addiction is forever. And once you are addicted, you're always addicted. It's just, as was mentioned before, it's in remission. So preventing them from getting their hands on that first dose, the prescription drug drop that is at police departments, I think they're at a lot of city buildings or county buildings throughout the county, is a big start to get those drugs that aren't needed out of your home. Everybody has bottles of prescriptions that they didn't finish, getting rid of those so that they're not in the hands of somebody who's not supposed to have them. And then educating and talking to the kids in our community and educating people on just how deadly this stuff is and how addictive it is.
Okay, thank you. Jim, as the county attorney, you've seen a lot of cases of this, and you were talking about probably 30–40% of the crime maybe in the entire county may be related to this. What have you seen with deaths regarding or related to heroin? Have you seen cases covering that?
Well, we've seen, unfortunately, as I mentioned, 22 just last year in Dakota County, deaths related to opioid abuse, and 9 of those were heroin cases. And it's, as Chief Long indicated, the newest thing that they're mixing this heroin with fentanyl. It's so deadly. I mean, even for addicts, it can kill addicts that are used to taking this drug because it's so powerful when you add that other substance into it. So we're just seeing this. There's so many deaths. You know, as you mentioned, you know, the 78 a day. I mean, just think about that. That's over 29,000 people that are dying every year in the United States from heroin, and it's going up significantly in the last 5 years. This whole epidemic it's just remarkable how this all came together, and a lot of it is, I think, there's a lot of blame to go in a lot of different places, and I'm not trying to point blame at any particular people, but let's face it, the pharmaceutical industry, is in large part responsible for why we consume 80% of the opioid pain medications in the world, in this country, is because they've been marketed, I think, without control for far too long, and that's led to just more of these painkillers being out there and in people's homes and in their medicine cabinets. And it's, and we need to, and I think there is a movement now, and I'm grateful to see it, because I was at a program similar to this that U.S. Attorney Andy Lugar put on just about a year and a half ago at the University of Minnesota. And there were a number of doctors that were involved in trying to now stand up and get involved with this, because doctors need to be educated too in terms of what they can and should be prescribing in terms of the level of doses. And we've done a better job. We still have a better job to do in terms of tracking the prescriptions that are issued by pharmacies, and keeping track of, because people just go from one to another. They'll doctor shop. The people that are addicted, they'll get prescriptions in multiple places, and then they'll just be buying these drugs in numerous different. They're not going to go back to the same pharmacy time and time again, but they're going to go to hundreds of different pharmacies. And if we can do a better job of tracking that, and we can put a stop to some of this abuse and slow it down. But so Listen, it's a multifaceted problem. There's a lot of things that we need to do. I'll just mention this because I've mentioned it before when I've spoken on this topic. There's a lot of good books out in America about heroin abuse and how we've gotten where we are. But I read one about a year and a half ago. It's called Dreamland, The True Tale of America's Opiate Epidemic, written by a man by the name of Sam Quinones. He was a former investigative reporter, I think, for the LA Times. He took three to 4 years of his life and just went out in middle America and went to Mexico, and he traced how this epidemic came, from the Mexican black tar markets and how it came in and how it's marketed in this country. And it's really a fascinating, scary book. It reads like a novel because he's interviewing people that from all sides, the addicts to the dealers to the and everything in between, and the doctors and the some of which are clearly unethical that are just handing out prescriptions left and right. But anyways, it's a fascinating book. I'd encourage you to take a look at it because it really opened my eyes to how we got so quickly to the level of problem that we have in this country, and it's enormous. And this is not an inner city problem. This happens in every place in America today. No one is immune from this problem, and that's the scary thing. We just have to raise that level of awareness. And let me just say one thing, Rick. Thank you for being here tonight. God bless you, and great.
And that part about it being able to strike any family, and it touches many, many families. I know that, everyone in this room probably knows someone, has a relative, or somebody who has suffered from some form of addiction, and opiate addiction now is becoming such a big thing. So what you're saying is there's kind of a number of factors that have come together to create this situation, this perfect storm, if you will. Rick, Jeff, just talk a second about where opiate or where heroin comes from and how it gets here.
Well, heroin is really, the majority of heroin in America, or on the planet essentially, comes, the number one producing country of heroin is Afghanistan. There's really only 4 other countries, which is Myanmar, Turkey, Mexico, and India. But Afghanistan is said to produce 75 to 90% of heroin base that's on the planet. So even if those other 4 countries only produced 5% and Afghanistan was at 75%, that's 95%. So assuming it comes from Afghanistan, and then almost all of the heroin that we see in America today comes from our southwest border, Mexico. It's imported, it's controlled by drug cartels. It's an extremely, extremely violent trade. People die over it every single day and just trafficking it. They die trying to traffic it. They die because they got caught trafficking it. Death is not only often the end result of an addiction, but it's often the end result of dealing this stuff. And the reason the stakes are so high is because it's a billion-dollar industry. And that's really what it boils down to. I mean, it's supply and demand, and right now they're controlling the supply.
Does it have a destabilizing effect in Mexico as well, of every country that it comes to, correct?
Right, and it's said to fund terrorism and everything else. The money is being laundered and filtered back to different countries illegally, and who knows where it goes from there.
And is the largest market the United States?
I would say, yeah, it is, just like prescription pills. We have, in illicit drugs in general, America is the largest consumer of illicit drugs in general. I don't know the specifics on heroin, but it would be safe to assume.
I did see a report the other day that said the northern part of the United States was actually being targeted for moving the heroin into this area. Mm-hmm.
And interestingly enough, America is we're a bigger, better, it's got to be bigger, it's got to be better, it's got to be stronger. And that's where fentanyl and these other, even more, there's substances out there now that are even more powerful than fentanyl that they're mixing with heroin. I mean, a good example of If you look at a sweet and low packet and you empty all of the contents of a sweet and low packet out on a tabletop, you will have 1 gram of sweet and low. That much fentanyl, on average, is enough to kill 333 people. So just to put in perspective how powerful fentanyl is. This stuff's being mixed in clandestine labs that have 0 regulation. As you can imagine.
So the probability of getting a fatal dose at any time, and talk about for a second just about the purity as well, because that's an important concept about stepping on it.
Yep, and purity of heroin in any drug, especially synthetic, that's produced the variables are so great and so vast that they're impossible to predict. If you, for instance, Minnesota, I don't know why, but we have very, very pure heroin in Minneapolis. And there's very little cutting agent put in it. Often, if you go out to the West Coast, for instance, San Francisco, they're known for not having very pure heroin. So when you're looking at a substance that just the smallest amount, if we talk about fentanyl-laced heroin, milligrams, the tip of a toothpick amount that can be fatal, dosing amounts are so important. And when we have unpredictable or very potent heroin, we'll see overdoses go up. It's the same thing when we know about a shipment of heroin that came into town that is laced with a fatal amount of fentanyl. Overdoses will spike. And there's news stories out on them where they have emergency clinics that they put out on administering Narcan because they anticipate there's a whole bunch of bad heroin on the street. It's a need. These addicts need it. So they're going to use it. They're going to consume it. We need to prepare for the overdoses that are about to come. And
Can you talk just a second about Narcan, because you mentioned Narcan and kind of what it does?
Narcan is essentially an antidote for an opiate overdose. I've seen it happen. It literally brings people back from a fatal overdose. People say, especially, and Rick may be able to attest to this, but you literally see people come back from death. You know, and you talk to a heroin addict that says, I've died 3 times. Well, you haven't died because death is, as far as I know, permanent. But you've survived an overdose, and your heart may have stopped. And Narcan essentially reverses an opiate overdose, but inversely, it immediately sends an opiate addict into withdrawals, which is also not a pleasant place to be. Granted, they're alive, but they're in immediate withdrawal because it removes all of the opiates from their system.
And Jim, maybe you can talk a little bit about how the courts and the criminal justice system is looking at this, because clearly we have a public health issue, we have deaths occurring, and what's happening in Dakota County here that you can talk about.
Well, first of all, let me just say, statewide, we just last year, with a coalition of folks, including the county attorneys in our state and the defense attorneys and public coalitions. I see Commissioner Mary Liz Holberg here, Dakota County Commissioner from Lakeville here tonight, and she's involved with a group, U.S. Action Network, that was involved in this coalition that came together to revise our drug laws in the state of Minnesota. And I'm proud that we were able to accomplish this because it's not easy to get all those different people together at the same table saying, you know, we have a problem, we need to address this. And it's not just about locking everybody up for as long as we possibly can. Let's take a look at what we really need to do. And that is, we need to lock up the drug dealers, the dangerous gang members, the people that are selling this stuff for profits to our kids in our communities. Yes, they need to be locked up. And we actually increased the penalties for some of those offenders selling larger amounts, you know, the so-called kingpins of the drug trades who are making the huge profits that Jeff was talking about. So that was a good thing. But at the same time, we eliminated some of the mandatory minimum sentences that our legislature adopted over 20 years ago in our state as we tried to get tough on this problem. And we had all these mandatory sentences for lower level, chemically addicted, non-violent offenders. And the answer to this problem is not, we're not going to solve this problem by incarcerating everybody. It's not going to happen, and we all realize that. And I think we came together in a sense of public responsibility to try to do the right thing and revise our drug laws, the most extensive revisions that have taken place in a quarter of a century in our state. These are positive changes. I think they're going to make positive changes in the lives of a lot of people for a long time, and what they're going to do. And I want to talk for a minute, if I could, Chief, about the drug court movement that I am a huge advocate for and proud to have helped get started here in Dakota County about 9 years ago. We have both an adult drug court, a juvenile drug court, a family dependency treatment court, which is aimed at families that have chemically addicted parents that are involved in our child protection system, which is oftentimes the same system as dealing with these cases at the same time our criminal justice system is. So we have these types of courts, and we're going to be able to, I believe, with these changes in our drug laws, get more chemically addicted, nonviolent offenders into these programs so they can get the help and the treatment they need to address this disease that they're suffering from. Because as you heard so eloquently from Carol tonight, you know, this is a problem that can be treated. It's not going to just go away. It's lifelong treatment, but you know what? We need to help and get these folks into these treatment programs, give them the support, the encouragement that they need, put some hope back into their lives, because I think, and Rick, maybe you can attest to this, one of the first things I think a drug-addicted person loses, they lose hope. And so we're doing this. We do it every week in Dakota County, and I personally staff this drug court in Hastings every Monday because I so believe in this program, and I really think it's the relationships that we develop with the judges, and there's Judge Karen Ospog, Erica McDonald, and David Knutson are our current drug court judges. And we previously had Judge Leslie Metzen, who's retired, and Catherine Mesrick and Tim McManus, who are still on the bench, but had been involved in our drug court program in the earlier years. This program can save lives. It makes a huge difference, and it's an uplifting program for everyone that's involved. And I would encourage, if you're ever interested, to stop down to see a drug court calendar on a Monday afternoon, and you'll see just uplifting things. And you know, the other thing that I think is so important about drug courts, and so important about, I think, the way we need to look at approaching this from a criminal justice standpoint is, yes, we have very quick responses to relapses. There's accountability in this program. There is going to be some time in county jails, but a lot less time than the state prison sentences that these folks would otherwise be facing. But it's the quick accountability, it's the holding people accountable and encouraging them at the same time to try to get control of this problem that I really think makes a difference in people's lives. It saves lives. I've literally had a number of people, just like Rick, come to us and say, we'd be dead if it wasn't for the drug court program that we have in our community. And I'm on the statewide committee that oversees drug courts in our state. I was appointed by the Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court to co-chair that subcommittee for our Judicial Council. And we've expanded significantly from about 30 drug courts in our state up to over 60 now. We have 87 counties in Minnesota. We want to continue to expand this. There shouldn't be a county in our state that doesn't have access to a drug court program. And with some of the money we're going to save from the prison beds that we're saving with this, with the statewide legislation I mentioned, we're going to be able to reinvest some of those dollars back into our system, both for improving drug courts, increasing drug courts, and creating more treatment opportunities and availability for offenders in our state. So anyways, it's working, and I'm proud to be a part of it.
And and like a good attorney that he is, he anticipated my question. That was my next question, to talk about the drug court. But I will say that you've seen very positive outcomes from the drug court, and it's a very different way of using the criminal justice system, the courts. I know the judges are very enthused about that as well. The ones who participate in that are very touched by the outcomes that they have. Let's go back to Rick for a second, because we stopped you right at the point where you went for help, when you started going for help. I want you to talk a little bit about rehabilitation and rehab and what that was like, and talk about that process and what happened with that.
Sure. Well, being a drug addict and going to treatment is not like being a car that needs its brakes fixed and going into a shop. You don't come out fixed. So parents need to understand that. I especially want to stress that you can send your kid to treatment and they'll go there for 3 to 4 weeks. There's programs that are 90 days, 75 days, even up to a year. That doesn't necessarily mean that person is fixed when they come home. It's the culture of recovery. It's what that person's willing to do to increase their chances for sobriety. Now, the problem is we have a lot of young kids, and what I've always said is the impetuousness of youth does not mix well with the praxis of heroin, meaning that if you've been a college student, gone out drinking one night, had too much to drink, you regretted it. You can't do that with heroin because you will not be alive the next day if you use it in that manner. And youthful people have a tendency to do so. So, my process was doing everything that could increase my chances, which was going to a different program right after. I was home for 2 weeks. I went to meetings every day. Then I went to a different program called Progress Valley. And they, had so many rules that it was impossible not to be in trouble there. But I understood what they were trying to literally, I said when I got there, I was like, has anybody ever not gotten put on restriction? And they said, in the whole history of your program, and they said, one. His name was Steve. I'm like, okay. But I understood what they were trying to do. They were trying to break down old habits and build new ones. And so I went with it. And I was successful in that program. And after that, I got housing through some people in AA. I went to AA just because I figured I'm not special. The solution is the same. And the 12 steps taught me a lot. And I got housing. I've had people take me in, help me with jobs, help me with money. There's really an incredible sort of clandestine community of people that don't identify themselves as addicts. They're all over. They're in the corporate world. They're at our Rotary groups. They're everywhere. And they are all mutually supportive. We know who each other are, wink and a nod, So anyway, that was part of the process, was just doing whatever it took to increase my chances. And also I went to a program, like I said, which was Redemption Ministries. A lot of treatment places will kick you out after one infraction. That doesn't even mean that you necessarily used or drank, but they will just kick you out because you broke the rules. Then you go back to the street that same day with your bags, no time to plan, and you oftentimes, I'm depressed. I'm going to use, or whatever. And so you repeat that process all over again. You go to treatment again, you go to a halfway house again, maybe you break the rules again, repeat the process, all at our tax dollars, expense. Right. So this program actually tolerated, some infractions and worked with me as hard as I was willing to work. So I wanted to stress to people that are dealing with opiate addicts that you are doing them a disservice to provide them with a comfort zone, to enable them, to say, oh, sure, here's some more money. The first thing you'll see is all their possessions go. I had 300 wonderful records. I had a vintage guitar and an amp and all these wonderful pedals and all sorts of photography, and I was so into the arts and music. All that's gone. Never to be replaced again. I have very few possessions right now. You'll see that. But what I want to stress is you are doing that person a disservice because they're not able to hit bottom if they have a place to go and just use drugs, and there are no consequences. The consequence is likely overdose, and that leads to fatalities, and that's what we're trying to prevent. And one more thing I wanted to talk about was one thing that hasn't been mentioned is it's kind of hip and fad right now, is to mix benzodiazepines with opiates and heroin, which is Klonopin, Valium, Xanax, anti-anxiety meds. Those lead to a kind of a chain reaction between both drugs, which skyrockets the likelihood that you will overdose and skyrockets the likelihood that you'll have a fatality. My closest friend, the first friend I met when I moved here back from California, he died of a combination of that. 3 people that I know very closely and personally died. When I was at Progress Valley, a guy died. That exact way, that's what kids are doing. And it's like if you run out of heroin, the benzodiazepines make you feel better. And if you have heroin, well, keep doing the benzodiazepines because it makes you higher. That's a very dangerous situation. So I just wanted to recognize that. But yeah, just to answer your question, it has to do with what are you willing to do to increase your chances? Minnesota we have the resources, we have the recovery community, we have treatment centers all over the place, we have a way to get to them free, we have a fantastic judicial system that is incredibly progressive. It should be a model for other states in this nation. So what I did is I just did everything I could to stay alive and to recover. So.
And two questions I have for you. Number
Yeah.
one, what should parents and family members watch for? And we're going to turn it over to questions soon for the audience to ask questions. But just if you could say, what would you say to parents? You've talked about tough love. You talked about don't give them everything. But what do parents look for at the early stages of this?
Changes in behavior. They're gone all the time. When they're back, they're sleeping or they don't feel good. Look for them feeling sick. You'll see marks on the face, maybe from picking or scratching, even though that's known to be associated with meth. Opiate users do it too. Their possessions. Look for that. Look for the constant. Look for the money. Where there's a drug habit, there has to be money. So look for that. Look for the money. And if they're pawning their possessions, or, you got to look for some other things. There's some pretty hard truths. There's some pretty great lengths people will go to maintain an opiate habit. Like she was saying, when your brain feels like, it feels, let me put it this way. One time I went, I went through 2 months of opiate withdrawal, and it felt like a great thirst. If you'd been in a desert for 4 days and hadn't had water. That's how strong it felt. So look for changes in behavior, look for them giving away their possessions, look for a change in friend groups, and then also just try and be compassionate with them too. I mean, I know I just talked about tough love, but be compassionate, keep an open dialogue with them, be loving, be open, don't have a stigma with them that, oh my God, you're just, we will disown you if, don't be that way.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Very good.
Can I just add something to that?
Sure. Carol?
One of the things that's tough for parents is that a lot of
Yeah, you can step right up to the microphone here. We're going to open this up to questions. So if you have questions, be ready to come on up.
A
Carol?
lot of the early warning signs of substance abuse are also the early warning signs of adolescence in general. So it's really hard for parents. So this is about a pattern that continues. And this is about trusting your gut as a parent to say, there's something wrong with my kid. I don't know what it is, but there's something wrong, and it's not just adolescence. And doing what you need to do to find out. A chemically dependent person, especially a kid, is not going to raise their hand and say, I'm addicted to heroin, would somebody please help me? That's what a rational brain does. But their rational brain is not running the show. The survival brain is running the show, and until they get some sobriety and their rational brain can kick back in, then they might say, oh my God, look where this landed me. But for them to do that in the moment is sometimes impossible. And so as the caring persons in their lives, we have to say, this, you're going to get help. I'm taking you there. You can hate me forever, but at least you'll be alive until you've got your rational brain working again.
That's a really good point. That's a great point. We are going to open up for questions. If you have questions, you can come up here, or I can come over next to you if you would rather stay. I'm going to start here, and then I'll come over there, okay?
My question would be possibly to, is it Nick? No.
Rick.
Rick and Jeff. So you have this increase, and even Jim for that matter, you have this increased opium and heroin use and all the advertisement on TV of the prescription drugs you can get. I see a big problem being the parents are using a lot of stuff, so it'd be hard for them to even guide their child. So that's a huge challenge for you two. And then I don't know if you saw any of that, Rick, while you were going down your youth, where the parents actually become the problem more than the child, and then eventually.
So we can start on one side and go all the way across with our panel members. Jeff, do you want to start on that? Did you see that?
I would agree. I think that drug use and abuse is certainly a generational thing. And I would agree that if you, as a parent, are a drug user or drug abuser, including prescription medications, your children all have a higher likelihood of becoming drug abusers as well.
That's what I'm saying is, while you were working in the field, did you see a lot of that where you had to get to the parent first before you could help the child?
I didn't per se, because we didn't have that long of a relationship with the offender. They were basically over into Jim's hands after we had contact with them. But I did see a lot of unfortunate situations where there's very young children that are in houses where there's heavy drug use going on, poor conditions, and one could only assume what the outcome of that's going to be.
And oftentimes there would be a health and welfare hold on the children going with that,
Right.
correct? When you'd see that.
Yeah,
Jim,
that's where our child protection system would get involved, and they get involved frequently in terms of removing children from those situations. But let's face it, the sad reality is that not every parent in this world is doing the right thing. There's unfortunately some bad parents and that are abusing drugs themselves. And in those situations, the kids in those families are significantly at risk for the potential for starting the drug abuse at very early ages. And one of the things we know is that the earlier age that kids start, and they're starting to abuse these chemicals as early as age 12 or younger, the earlier they start, the more likely it is they're going to have long-term addiction problems. So we have to recognize that this is even very young kids that are using it. 7 out of the 10 drugs most commonly abused by teenagers are prescription medications. So that's where they're starting, as Jeff indicated earlier, with abusing this. And there's, a lot of kids, over 2,500 kids in America between the ages of 12 and 17 that abuse a pain reliever for the first time every day. So anyways, keep your eyes open, but there are family problems. We are intervening through the child protection system to address those families. That's why we have this family dependency treatment court that I mentioned, because that's what that's all about. As we try to reunify those families, that's the goal of the child protection system, but only if it can be done safely and those kids are safe and not under those situations where they're being exposed to drug use and drug abuse.
thank you. Rick, you can touch on that there.
Yeah, just briefly.
Sure.
I mean, it's really, Jim said it best. I mean, this is a problem for our judicial system. Most of the people I deal with at this juncture are parents that are abusing drugs. Keep in mind, if you drink every day and get, maybe not necessarily drunk, but if you drink heavily in front of your kid, they're really not going to take your word too much about, so what if I go use prescription drugs? Right. That there's not a lot of credibility there. It's a safety issue where we need to get child protection involved when parents use drugs and the kids are at risk. So it does damage both in that kid is more likely to become an addict. It also puts them at odds with their parent and crushes a relationship that will affect them for the rest of their life. So, it's really a judicial issue. Okay. It's very sad.
Okay, thank you. And I know we have another question here.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, actually. For Mr. Backstrom, how does Dakota County compare to other counties? And then perhaps Mr. Hansen can address, is Narcan easily available and what's its cost, please?
Well, I think Dakota County is similar to, all of the counties in the metro area are facing significant problems with drug abuse, drug addiction, and rising rates of heroin deaths. I mean, it's true, I think it's probably more deaths in Hennepin County on a per capita basis than here, but we have quite a few. And it's a growing problem, and that's true in all of the metro counties and all the urban counties in our state, and even some of the smaller. As I said before, this is just not an urban problem, a big city problem. This happens anywhere. So even the smaller counties struggle with these problems, and they have less resources to deal with those. We are really fortunate in our county to have a very progressive county board that believes in prevention, that believes in early intervention, that supports efforts in my office, our Sheriff Tim Leslie, and the work he does on prevention. They supported the prescription drop-off sites now where we have the ability to drop off prescription medications safely. That at the time that Sheriff Dave Bellows at the time started that program, and all of our police chiefs jumped on board, and those places are available in every community in our county now, so medications can be dropped off safely and disposed of safely, which is another positive thing.
And Narcan? Cost?
Narcan is readily available. It's sold over the counter now. Kind of a driving force behind that was a law called Steve's Law, which essentially means that if your friend or loved one or somebody is overdosing and you're using with them, you're immune to criminal sanctions to stay and provide help. And Narcan came into the picture, and it was prescription only, and now it is available over the counter. I don't remember the exact cost. I think it's just over $100 for 2 dosage units, which are administered through a nasal spray. A layman can learn how to administer Narcan very easily. And part of the training is recognizing the overdoses.
Okay. Other questions? There you go.
So I'm just curious, there's been a lot of talk about the fact that prescription meds oftentimes are kind of the gateway drug into heroin use and other types of overdose situations. Does anyone know, is there anything being done more with the medical community as far as monitoring so people aren't doctor shopping? Is there anything being done along those lines to try to help get a handle on that?
Well, if I could answer that, we are, as I mentioned earlier, there's efforts in that area going on in terms of trying to get pharmacies to track this type of information so there can't be this pharmacy shopping. There's a big effort to improve education among doctors and prescribers of medication so they understand the potential dangers of addiction, because they're the ones who are having this stuff marketed to them by the pharmaceutical industries. They're marketing it in large part to the doctors and encouraging doctors to prescribe their medications and giving them deals and this and that. But there's a much better effort going on. There's much more public awareness about those issues than there was even 3 years ago, and it's continuing to increase. So I feel much better about it than I did just 3 years ago, and it's continuing to improve. So I think we have a lot more responsibility from our medical communities and our pharmacies today than we've had before. We still need to work on these issues. We should be able to drop off, quite frankly, I hope the legislature changes, we should be able to drop off prescription medications at pharmacies. They can't legally take them back. Right. But, you know, if you want to get rid of your unused medications, why can't you take it to a pharmacy and drop it off? Yeah. You know, on Sundays and after hours where that's closer to you. We should be able to do that, and hopefully that'll change.
I have time for one more question. Okay, just quickly, and then we'll go to this woman over here. Go ahead, Carol. You can just go ahead.
There's a registry too, where doctors can look up someone's prescription and where they're getting them. And so they have an idea if they're doctor shopping too. So they are making a lot of different ways where doctors can keep track of them. Because they're getting sued, the doctors are. So, you know, they have to start paying attention. But it's not digital, it's not. Yep, it's all digital.
Yep. Okay, we have one more question here.
It's very encouraging to hear what we're doing in our court systems and our laws, not to just lock people up. Is any changes being made to give parents more power to support their children who have become addicts? Because there's a lot of keeping parents out of it, not being allowed, I mean, no. A 16-year-old on probation can sign a waiver that does not allow their parents to see their UAs, hear anything about their outpatient treatment programs, and these are parents that want to help, and we're not allowed to know anything. That doesn't make any sense.
Okay, I think that's for Mr. Backstrom.
Well, I do agree with you that for parents that care and want to be involved and try to make a difference, they should be able to know about those things. But again, that's going to require some law changes in terms of, you know, until you're, and I agree with you, until a child is 18, you should, as a parent, still be able to have access to that type of information. Yeah, you know, so, but I think we're going to need some law changes to improve that so that can occur.
I just, we're running out of time here, and we do want to hear from our police chief, Jeff Long, to make some final comments for us this evening. I know there's more questions. I know the panel will be here and available for questions afterwards. There's also outside in the foyer, there's a number of booths with information. We will be here and available. I'd like to thank our officer, Jeff Hansen here, our Dakota County Attorney, Jim Backstrom, and Rick Hillier. Let's give them a round of applause. And I'd also like to thank everyone in this room tonight, because the way that real positive change happens from people being involved and learning information about what's going on, because that's the only way we're going to do this. I'll turn it over to our police chief, Jeff Long, and he'll. Good job.
I almost need the same booster chair, but I'm okay. So I too want to thank you, and I also want to thank the Rotary for sponsoring this event, as well as the city, the Path Coalition, the schools, so forth. You've had a lot of information thrown at you tonight. We realize that, and that was part of the idea tonight at the forum. Put as much out there as we can possibly get you so you can pass the information along. I hope you have a better understanding of why we have a concern of heroin and opioid abuse in our community. So what can you do? It's already really been discussed. A number of people have said it. Get rid of the spare medications at home. That's the first step you can take. You can drop those off at the police department. We have a drop box coming up this Saturday. I think it's on this slide now, or on March 18th. You can drop off unused medications. We're doing a mass collection at that point. So please bring those medications in. It's not just the opioids anymore. Obviously, it's Xanax and these other drugs. Try to have conversations in the community. Talk to other people. This will be replayed on cable. There will be a schedule out for that. Please encourage people to watch us so they understand. We can't do anything until we work together. There's a number of things that I just wanted to touch on, but the Narcan, I, like everyone else, has seen that save lives. If you know somebody that is abusing drugs, please, or opioids, please take the time to go get that. It will save lives. We don't carry them in the police car, our paramedics do, but it literally is minutes and you can save somebody's life. I mentioned the drug playback, and it's being replayed on this cable. So again, I will turn it back over to Chief Von Hoff, and we'll wrap it up.
Well, I actually turned off my mic. So I thought I was done. Actually, again, we'd just like to thank you for coming this evening. There's so much information available. I know that you can always call the police department. You can call the county attorney's office. They have a great amount of information. And I know that Rick would be happy to talk to anyone and have information as well. So thank you again for coming this evening. I hope this has been informational for you. And we have plenty of information out there. Thank you and have a good evening.